Hello and welcome to the In the Tank podcast, episode 207, the podcast that explores work of think tanks across the country. As always, I am your host, Donald Kendal, and joining me via the internet, I've got Justin Haskins, a editorial director here at the Heartland Institute. How are you today, good sir?
I'm doing very well. Thank you, Donald.
I'm getting to the point with that where, like, when I think I got it right, I'm thinking that I have it wrong. And it's flip-flopping in my head now, so I apologize.
You gotta up your game, man. All the other shows that I'm on, all the myriad shows that I'm on, they all get it right.
Yeah, you're right.
Just call Justin unpaid Fox News contributor, because that's basically his job now.
Yeah, maybe we could do that.
Yes, that's what I'll call him. Also joining us across from the table from me, we have Jim Lakely, Director of Communications here at the Heartland Institute. How are you today, good sir?
I've done better. I'm feeling a little under the weather, so my rants will not be up to 11. It'll only be up to about 9.3.
9.3, still good on the scale of me. And also joining us, we have Andy, the producer. Oh, wait, no, he's not here. Boom, loser. Watching the Bears lose the other day apparently has kept him out of this podcast. So, whatever. We're just going to have to manage without him.
He's so depressed that he couldn't come in.
Yeah.
I'm sure he is.
He's like just wallowing in depression over the Bears losing. You'd think he'd be used to it by now, but
I know,
he's
right?
not. Sad.
Oh, jeez. Jim, we've got a big event coming up. You want to tell us a little bit about that?
We do. We have our 35th anniversary benefit dinner. That's October 4th. In Palatine, Illinois, at a wonderful place called the Cotillion. And our keynote speaker and the winner of the Heartland Liberty Prize is none other than the Glenn Beck, founder of Blaze TV, nationally syndicated radio talk show host, Tea Party rally star. The man has fought his whole life for liberty, and he is the perfect speaker for our theme of stopping socialism, which is kind of like the theme of this podcast. And so I encourage you to go to heartland.org and get your tickets. That's on October 4th. Tickets are selling pretty good, so you better get there soon.
All right, cool. So we have one topic of discussion today, and that is going to be the CNN Climate Crisis Town Hall. I think that if they were able to spend 7 hours talking about this, then the least we can do is spend an hour rebutting it. So I think that's going to be the majority of our topics today. There might be one little thing that we get to at the very end, but it kind of ties into all of this. So I don't know. Maybe that's. I think that's what we're gonna do. I think we're just gonna spend the whole time talking about this stuff. And again, 7 hours. They gave us plenty of material to work with here.
It was like the old Jerry Lewis telethon, but all the comedy was unintentional.
Nice.
That's pretty good, Jim, except a lot of people don't know who Jerry Lewis is anymore.
I don't, but I know what a telethon is.
I do know what a telethon is.
Yeah.
That's true.
I looked it up in the card catalog at the library.
Now people have to Google card catalog. This is really, we're going to be taxing the internet with it.
Yeah. Just go to Blockbuster, rent a video on it. So, CNN Climate Crisis Town Hall. What day was that? That was on Wednesday?
Sure, yeah, Wednesday.
That was on Wednesday.
Wednesday,
yes.
yeah. So it's kind of surprising. So we'll get into all of this. I mean, obviously they talked about all types of authoritarianism, controlling every aspect of your life in the aims of combating climate change. But for all of the talk and the fact that there was 10 candidates that are going to participate in this, it kind of flew under my radar. I mean, I knew that it was supposed to be coming up, but I wasn't really sure what day it was going to be. And I completely forgot about it until I walked over to your office at the end of the day and you were watching it.
Yeah.
So I don't know if that has just to say about me and my kind of filter for this type of alarmism, or the fact that this is just not getting the attention that they really wanted it to do.
Well, what's funny is that the ratings, CNN is in last place anyway in the cable ratings,
right,
all day long. Morning, the morning they're in last place, the afternoon they're in last place, in the evening they're in last place, and their ratings for this 7 hour Jerry Lewis telethon with the unintentional comedy for 7 hours. My God, 7 hours.
Yeah.
The ratings actually went down for this as well.
Is that
I
right?
believe, yeah. So it's even a little worse.
It
no,
did.
yeah, it was even
It
worse.
didn't
than
even beat
usual.
out MSNBC.
Yeah, it's just sad. So actually, that's actually the first time I've watched CNN on purpose in at least 5 years.
Yeah.
And the only reason I knew it was on is because I'm in a lot of emails and we have lots of friends. Let's just say that on this side of this topic, and we had all said, "Hey, let's watch it. Let's live tweet it and stuff." Like Steve Malloy, who's at Junk Science on Twitter, was having a ball, and I said, "Dude, you deserve combat pay." The first 20 minutes of it, my head almost exploded. But then you really got to lean into it. It was so absurd. You just start leaning in, as they would say on MSNBC, and it just starts to become fun. You have to get over the hump, though.
Well, one of the big things that because I've talked about the Democratic debate and how I'm planning on watching the entire hour and a half, but I get like 20 minutes into it and have to give up. The one thing that this had going for it is the crowd wasn't nearly as active in applauding every punchline. It's not punchline, talking point.
No, punchline works.
Punchline works. But so that allowed me to get into it, and I watched it the next day. I watched most of this yesterday in preparation for today's podcast. So I kind of already knew all of the crazy stuff that was going to be in there. So for me, watching through it, I was just kind of keeping an eye out for just more crazy stuff that I could jot down so that we could talk about it here.
Right.
So that was kind of what made me get through the majority of it. Justin, how much of this did you actually suffer through?
I did not suffer through much of it, to be perfectly honest. I read
clips here
lots
and
and
there?
lots and lots of clips. I watched lots of clips. I read a lot of transcripts, that kind of thing, but I didn't actually sit and watch. I actually could not find a full version of it because I was going to.
Yeah.
I was going to watch as much of it as possible, but I couldn't even find a full version of it anywhere. So
all 7 hours, Justin. Really, you were going to watch all 7 hours?
No. So it's funny that the day before, a certain television show on Fox News asked me to come on the following night to talk about this town hall, but they didn't tell me. This was before the town hall actually started, so I didn't know how long it was going to be or anything like that. And I thought to myself, I'm not going to watch it live because I've got more important things to do than that. But I will watch it the next day. And I thought, how bad could it be? I'll wake up in the morning and I'll watch, 45 minutes or an hour and a half or whatever it is, fast forward through commercial breaks. And then when I saw it was 7 hours, I was like, there's no way I can watch this. There's just not even possible for me to watch it. And then I couldn't even find a full version of it, probably because it's so large, the file.
Yeah.
They probably can't even upload it to YouTube. Or
They've been trying for a while now. Their browser isn't booting up.
We're not doing this. We're not taking this garbage.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I don't know. I couldn't watch the whole thing, but frankly, I'm glad I didn't.
Yeah.
So.
I probably watched the majority of certain people. I saw most of Andrew Yang's. I watched most of Camilla Harris up there, probably half of Bernie's, some Elizabeth Warren. I kind of skipped some of the other people or whatever. But the way that this was being talked about, or the way that they were trying to promote it, is we're spending this much time on it because it's such a big deal. This is so important. We have to dedicate 7 hours to this. So I kind of get what they were going for, but I think the end result was an absolute nightmare for them PR-wise. This is just a gold mine for anybody that's running against these people, or just running against the Democrats or whoever's holding up this idea of the Green New Deal. They just supplied these people with unlimited ammunition, 7 hours worth of stuff that you could pick and choose from and play video clips and audio clips and respond to certain things, which is exactly what we're going to be doing.
Yeah. I can't wait to get into that. I'm sure our listeners are very excited to hear the clips, the highlights of this, so they didn't have to, watch it, Clockwork Orange style with their eyelids propped open so they could watch the whole thing. That's how I imagined Justin having to do it by the end. But actually, there's lots of clips on Twitter, which some of these clips that we grabbed from. But and there's a lot of fun commentary on Twitter. But something that I didn't think of, but I noticed that somebody mentioned on Twitter, was that the only people sharing clips of people of all these candidates talking on the climate are conservatives. There isn't a single liberal outfit or liberal influencer on Twitter that are sharing these clips. That should tell you everything about what this whole event turned into.
Yeah,
CNN didn't even post the video on its own website, a full version of it.
There you go.
Right. Yeah, I found little 10-minute clips when I looked up CNN specifically. The ones when I was talking to you, Justin, about how they have them sectioned out, I thought it was CNN, but it wasn't. It was some other organization, some other YouTube channel that was putting up like the 45-minute clips of the individual candidates, which is where I watched most of it.
And the reason for that, is that, and I did tweet this out. I kept waiting. I did watch this for I probably watched 2 full hours of it over time, in and out, and there was not a and the audience was just full of left-wing activists and environmental activists and people going for graduate degrees in climate activism. Good luck with that one. And not a single nutty idea did any of the candidates say no to. It didn't matter how crazy the idea was.
Yeah.
Nobody ever said, well, maybe not. No, everything was yes, 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 yes. No matter how crazy the idea or proposition came from the audience. And that's why you're not seeing any clips anywhere, because it's so out there.
Well, and the other thing is, again, kind of the debates where you hear them kind of showcase all of their ideas. And those are like sugar-coated with a whole bunch of free stuff and free healthcare and free college and, all of this bleeding heart type of things. This was so specific to just climate change that, to me, I described it to Justin. I was like, this was just full-on authoritarianism on full display for 7 hours. This is a nightmare.
And going back to what Donnie said earlier when he kind of started with this whole segment here, I think it's just a train wreck because you're talking about 7 hours of a topic that really most people don't really care all that much about. Average people, average voters don't really care all much about this. I mean, there are some people in the Democratic Party who care about it, but certainly middle of the road voters do not care about this issue. But here's what they do care about. They care about not having their lives totally destroyed by this issue. They'd care about not having many of their activities, like, I don't know, drinking from plastic straws, banned because it's going to hurt some sea turtle somewhere or something. They care about those kinds of things. They care about their energy bills and whether they're going to go up astronomically. And yet there was no concern about any of that stuff throughout this entire night. It was full of how the government is going to take over your life, how they're going to incentivize or decentivize certain behaviors. It was like the worst possible thing that they could have done if they want to win over middle of the road Midwest voters, which is, by the way, who they need to win over if they're going to win in 2020. I don't know if they know that yet,
right?
But that's common sense. They cannot win the election without winning back many of those states that Donald Trump won in the Midwest, and they did nothing to help themselves last night. In fact, they were openly calling for destroying millions of jobs across the country.
Right.
I mean, it's unbelievable. It's just unbelievable.
And Justin, that's a great point, because Donald Trump actually won Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin by a combined less than 100,000 votes. I mean, it was really it was very close. So the Democrats don't even have to do a lot to get those states back. And they're running so hard in the other direction, they're never going to get those states back. Do you think people in Pennsylvania that don't live in inner city Philadelphia want to be told what kind of straws they can use and how much meat they can consume? How about in Wisconsin, where they like their burgers in Wisconsin and their cheese, and so we're going to just reduce all of that? It is just amazing to me that they have to pick off these states, and the margin is really tight, and they're just sprinting. Actually, they run an airplane because they get to fly those in the other direction.
Well, I mean, so here are the things, and we'll talk about probably each of these as we go on through the episode. But the world is going to end if action isn't taken within the next 11 years. Controlling the energy that we produce and use, controlling the products that we use, controlling the food that we eat, controlling the cars that we drive, controlling the population growth. Like, where do we even start with this? I think to just kind of keep it streamlined, maybe we should tackle the whole core concept that this is all based around, which is the idea that if we don't do something within 11 years, we don't severely reduce and even net negative our carbon dioxide emissions, that we're going to have a catastrophic climate catastrophe Jim, you were just at ICC and all of that stuff. What do you have to say about that core concept that this whole thing has been based on?
Well, it's interesting. Our friend Pat Michaels, scientist who's spoken at probably almost all of our ICCCs, our climate conferences in the past, he was on Laura Ingram's show last night to rebut all of this. And he had said something that really, I think, hopefully impacted with her 3 million viewers every night. And if the United States went to carbon dioxide emission zero today, if from here on out we had never emitted another molecule of CO2, the difference in temperature on the globe, by the UN's own projections, by the year 2100, would be reduced by 14/100ths of a degree. You can't measure 14/100ths of a degree of global temperature. And so this all goes back to the Paris Climate Agreement, doing the Paris Climate Agreement or not doing the Paris Climate Agreement. And that means 100% compliance across the globe. The difference in temperature would be, I think, 0.2 of a degree. You really can't measure 0.2 of a degree.
Those
it's
are
not
wildly optimistic.
And those, yes,
wildly optimistic.
That's
in my
right.
opinion.
And so that's the thing. As you're watching, and you're going to be listening to the clips here on this podcast, and you see all these radical proposals put forth by these candidates for president and their supporters in the audience and the CNN anchors. It's all for nothing. It would all be for nothing. That the state, the government, would be involved in literally every single decision and aspect of your life for nothing. It would have zero effect on global temperatures and on sea level rise and on forestation and all of that stuff.
Well, one of the things that I saw reoccurring amongst a lot of the candidates that I was listening to was they're kind of not making a distinction between CO2 and just the idea of pollution, right? So, I mean, you got Buttigieg talking about how you're a sinner if you, don't go full bore into this whole like climate change alarmism. I think the terminology that he used was like, if God saw us belching all this pollution into the air. And then Yang talked about China, and he basically said that they are the ones that are facing the hardest ramifications of climate change, and talking about smog. And it's like, smog and CO2 are totally different things, right, Jim?
Yeah, I mean, they do this all the time. In fact, they always call it carbon pollution. We have to reduce carbon pollution in the air. It's like, well, we already do. We have scrubbers on our power plants. That's what does that. It's carbon dioxide emissions, which is supposedly warming the earth in such a quick pace that we're going to, reduce life on Earth to a hellscape. But it is not. And so they actually just started saying, we got to reduce pollution in the air. It's like, dude, this isn't 1975 anymore. Yeah. The Indian is not crying about how dirty the Hudson River is anymore. That's over.
Right.
We've actually cleaned up everything. It's carbon dioxide emissions. Carbon dioxide is a harmless, and you can't see it in the air, and it's vital to life on Earth. But they kept saying, we have to reduce our pollution by half by 2030 or something. It's like we already have so little pollution compared to our GDP. It's actually a huge success story.
Right.
But the CNN anchors and of course, all the candidates for president and, of course, all the people in the audience, I think either are ignorant, stupid, or purposely distorting the issue so that they can get their way. And it's probably mostly the latter.
Yeah.
I think that I'll go so far as to say that I think that the vast majority of people who are educated on this issue at all, which I think includes CNN anchors at this point in time. I mean, they subjected themselves to 7 hours of this, so they must at least have done some research on this. I think that they're all liars. I mean, I think that they're all 100% liars, and here's why. I'm totally confident of this too. I don't think this is a theory. I think that they're all lying because they know that no matter what we do here, it will make absolutely no difference whatsoever. They've seen the data that shows that the rest of the world is dramatically increasing, not just by a little bit. I mean, dramatically increasing their CO2 emissions.
Right.
In China, in India, in Africa, dramatically increasing their CO2 emissions. There are more than 50 coal-fired power plants that they are either building or planning to build in China right now that are larger than the largest coal-fired power plant in the state of Minnesota that the left has been trying to shut down forever. So what is the point of shutting down that coal-fired power plant? There are going to be 50 more of them over the next 10 years or something that's going to be built in China. So if they know this, they know that it's not going to make any difference, and yet they and they recognized it actually in certain parts of the debate that we had to do something to convince those countries to give up their CO2 emissions too. And there's nothing that we can do to do that.
Yeah,
we have to lead, Justin. We have to lead.
Yeah, and that's one of the two things that I had seen in the responses from some of the candidates, that we have to set a good example for them, and then they'll just follow us.
My answer to that is Obama did that for 8 years.
Exactly.
Look how, and China really followed him, right?
Yeah.
You know, the great Obama, the Nobel Prize winner. My God, he could just wave his Nobel Prize around. Follow me, everybody. And
exactly.
Nobody's
they
coming.
Literally signed the Paris Climate Agreement, a lot of these countries, and then they didn't do anything. They didn't do the things they promised to do.
Well, some of the countries that did actually have to cut back their emissions, you're right, they didn't meet their targets. But then there are other countries, these developing countries, that didn't have to do it for like 30 plus years or something like that. So of course they would sign on to this. If we have to like stunt our growth by attaching ourselves to these non-functioning energy sources like wind and solar, and while they get to create as many coal power plants as they want in the meantime and then reassess in 30 years, why wouldn't they sign on to that?
Plus they get cash from the United States and other Western countries,
right.
Direct cash influence, for climate mitigation and all of that. It's a huge scam. Donald Trump was right to make it basically the defining moment policy-wise of his first year of his presidency. And we're all the better for it.
Yeah. So, I mean, just kind of staying on the topic of energy until we move on to some of the a little bit more fun topics here. But, I mean, you saw these candidates basically reject everything with the exception of wind and solar. You had Kamala Harris talking about banning fossil fuel development on federal lands. She mentioned banning offshore drilling. Several people talked about getting rid of fracking or banning fracking. A lot of the candidates were upfront about wanting to either not continuing nuclear development or to slowly wean ourselves off of nuclear development. So I did want to bring up one little bright spot. I think it's the only bright spot that I'd seen in the entire time, which is Cory Booker and Yang were both open to the idea of using nuclear power to, play a role in this emissionless energy production. In fact, Cory Booker says people who think that we can get there, zero emissions, without nuclear being part of the blend just aren't looking at the facts. And then Yang talked about the future and all of the potential for innovation in terms of nuclear power, talked about like thorium reactors and all of that type of stuff. So they've got a couple of people that are open to this idea of nuclear, where on the other hand, you had the rest of them, including Elizabeth Warren, saying that we want to shut down the existing nuclear power plants as well.
So the best you can say is that Yang is the least crazy and smart, and Cory Booker is the least crazy but dumb.
Well, I wouldn't go that far, especially when we get into some of these other things. But the idea that we're going to get all of our energy from wind and solar. I mean, staying on fracking for a minute. I mean, I wish we had the fracking guy on. He's not going to be on this week, but he would tell us about how the main reason that the United States were to be able to reduce our carbon emissions is because of natural gas, which is a byproduct, or I guess the goal, of fracking. So yeah, get rid of that. We're just doing wind and solar. It's insane.
Well, and the thing that annoys me so much about that entire debate is that if you really care about helping the planet, if that's really what you want to do, then the last thing that you would do is want the entire country to run on wind and solar, which is exactly what Bernie Sanders and exactly what Elizabeth Warren and other people say. They want to save the planet. But in order to do that, in order to run the entire country on wind and solar, you would need a landmass roughly the size of the state of California, consumed entirely by wind farms and solar facilities. So how is that good for the environment to destroy all of that land? And then on top of that, you need thousands and tens of thousands of miles of new transmission lines. And on top of that, you need to go around the world, strip mining the natural resources from the world to build all of these solar facilities. And where are you going to get the rare earth minerals? You're going to get them from mines and places in Africa where they have no human rights standards. You have child labor and all of that, and cobalt mines and things. I mean, why don't we ever and they always talk to us constantly about how there's this Russian collusion that went on and how Donald Trump has sold his soul to Russia and all of that. And we don't need to get into that. It's all nonsense. But they want us to get to run our entire economy on renewable energy sources that are dependent on rare earth minerals, which 80% of them or something like that are processed in one country, China, that doesn't like us. So they want to hand over all of our energy, basically control of our entire energy system, to the Chinese. They think that's a good idea. I mean, I just can't. I mean, if I didn't know any better, I would say that there's some sort of collusion going on between them and the Chinese government, because this would be great for China. The best thing in the world for China would be for us to go off the financial cliff and commit economic suicide by switching our entire economy over to renewable energy sources, and then be forced to depend on China for all of our, or most of our, rare earth minerals. They would love that if we did it.
Yeah. Yeah, oh man, I don't know. Like, this is another thing about like the debates, and this was like became very apparent to me when Hillary was debating Bernie back in the 2016 primaries. But like they were just trying to outdo each other in craziness, and I feel like that was also going on here, right? So one person was saying, "Oh, we need to do it in 30 years," and the next person, "Well, 25 years." So this clip, which was sent to me, I thought was going to be unremarkable. And I was like, all right, yeah, maybe we'll play it if we get time or something like that. But this is Andrew Yang talking about how he thinks that we should calculate the GDP. So it sounds like it's nothing, but I think there's some important takeaways from this. So I'm going to play this here.
All we need to do is, as your president, I will go down the street to the Bureau of Economic Analysis and say, hey, GDP, 100 years old, kind of out of date. Let's upgrade it with a new scorecard that includes our environmental sustainability and our goals, the carbon footprint that companies are putting out there, but also our kids' health, which is tied to the climate, health and life expectancy, also tied to the climate, mental health and freedom from substance abuse. These are all things we can tie to our economic measurements, and then you will see us accelerate in a big way, because we can't fall into this trap, this false dichotomy that what's good for the planet is bad for the economy.
So do you catch that? He doesn't want us to fall into the false dichotomy that what's good for the planet is bad for the economy. So to rectify that, he's just going to fudge the numbers. Like, is that what he's like? We don't want to give the impression that the economy is suffering by pursuing all of these things. So let's just make them take that into account. Like, is that like totally, if you just read into just 1 degree, 1 level of what he's talking about there, it just completely like decimates the point that he's trying to make.
He's basically saying, I mean, can you imagine if we had this for almost any other measurement that we were looking at, that we just start dumping in all of these economic measurements like, oh, we're going to look at unemployment. So while we're looking at unemployment, let's have the unemployment rate be partly based on, I don't know, something totally unrelated to unemployment.
Right.
Like people's happiness.
Yeah.
Let's put that into the unemployment rate factor. And you say, well, there's lots of people out of work, but there's happiness has gone up a little bit, so we can lower the unemployment rate. Right. It's like, that makes no sense. Yet that's exactly what he's going for.
It's fun employment.
Fun.
Yeah.
Measure that.
My bank account, I'm going to have when I go in and check how much money I have in my bank account, I want my new measurement of to see how much money I have to also include, just like how much enjoyment I got out of dinner the last night. Like, it's just, it's preposterous.
Let's have our credit scores be partly determined based on our personal perception of our lives. Forget about the actual financial situation we're in. What do we think our financial situation is? Are we happy about it? Because if I'm happy about it, then maybe some homeless guy on the street loves his life, but has no money in the bank, but that should count for something. He should have a higher credit score. I mean, literally, this is what he's suggesting. It's totally insane.
It's so bizarre, and that is just one tiny example.
How is he not laughed off the stage at that point in time?
Because he's the smart one, Justin.
Yeah,
they need one of those people like in the 1800s that had one of those big hooks, and they'd come out and just hook them and drag them off the side of the stage. As soon as he said that, they should have been like, "All right,
and that's how we should have gauged how like well these candidates did. Like, how long did you stay on the stage before someone had to hook you off? Like, Bernie's talking about population control. Get him off there. He only lasted 10 minutes.
Yeah, how long before the crowd starts throwing cabbage and tomatoes at your face?
It's the gong show, man. You can just hit the gong. It's awesome.
Right. All right, let's move on to food. So not only do they want to control the energy and then totally fudge the numbers to make it seem like the economy is still doing fine, they also want to control what you eat. So Kamala Harris was asked about basically the concept of eating too much red meat contributing to global warming and what she would do about it. So let's listen into this.
Certain countries have changed their dietary guidelines to reduce the consumption of red meat in light of the impact of the climate change.
Yeah.
If elected, will you be supporting change in dietary guidelines? And then how will you plan on implementing the changes so that people effectively change their diets?
Yeah, I mean, and thank you, Carol, for your work and the question. I think of the point that you're raising in a broader context, which is that as a nation, we actually have to have a real priority at the highest level of government around what we eat and in terms of healthy eating, because we...
Let's just stop there for 1 minute, okay? Just what she just said there, that we have to have a priority at the highest levels of the government to control what we're eating. Yep. She's just said that.
Of course.
Get the president on it right away.
She
Too many kids are eating donuts, and too many people are going to In-N-Out Burger. We got to stop it. We got to stop it right away. Get the president on it. Call the National Guard.
But the thing is, this is like a different level than just having the first lady, talking about like eating healthy in school.
Yeah, if you thought Michelle Obama, taking over the school lunch program and having the lunches so bad kids are throwing them away all over the place that they get a slice of wheat bread with a piece of cheese on it, and if you think if you think that isn't enough, it has to go higher than that, man. Right. It has to go to the highest level, which is the president determining what everybody can eat, not just school kids. Genius. Run on that stuff.
Yeah.
And I think also this is a perfect opportunity, because since we're bringing up Michelle Obama, I don't want to totally like leave her out of all of this, and Barack Obama too. So much of what they did, so many on the right, when we were hearing all of these, school lunch programs and all these different things Obama was talking about, and the Paris Climate Agreement and all of that, the right would constantly say, people who support individual liberty were constantly saying, this is a slippery slope. We are absolutely headed towards more than this. And there were a lot of people on the left who just mocked us and said, no, that's not what's going on. That's not what's happening here. Michelle Obama just wants kids to eat healthy. And now what we're seeing in this presidential election is that all of those predictions absolutely have come true.
Right.
We are way down the slippery slope on all of this stuff. We now have candidates calling for all kinds of crazy stuff, but I won't spoil what's about to come.
Yeah. I rewound it a little bit just so that people can hear her saying it again and see that I'm not taking this out of context. This is how she responded, but I'll let the clip play to the end here.
I think of the point that you're raising in a broader context, which is that as a nation, we actually have to have a real priority at the highest level of government around what we eat and in terms of healthy eating, because we have a problem in America. And we can talk about all that we are now, the subject of this conversation. We can talk about the amount of sugar in everything. We could talk about soda. We could go on and on. So the answer is yes. But I'll also say this. The balance that we have to strike here, frankly, is about what government can and should do around creating incentives and then banning certain behaviors. I mean, just to be very honest with you, I love cheeseburgers from time to time, right? I mean, I just do. And I think that, but there has to be also what we do in terms of creating incentives that we will eat in a healthy way, that we will encourage moderation, and that we will be educated about the effect of our eating habits on our environment. And we have to do a much better job of that, and the government has to do a much better job of that.
So, I mean, I'm just saying, you love cheeseburgers. I mean, we all do. I don't know whether
you know, from time to
try
time,
the Beyond Burger, the Impossible Burger, right? They try, but it's not quite the same. That's my personal opinion. But would you support changing the dietary guidelines?
Yes.
The food pyramid. What people
yes.
to reduce red meat specifically?
Yes, I would. And I'll tell you,
You know what? With all due respect, Kamala Harris, screw you. Screw you. Telling me what I can eat that I can't have. Oh, I like cheeseburgers from time to time.
She's apologizing for liking cheeseburgers.
Yeah, isn't that crazy? What, are you an American or what? I mean, cheeseburgers are as American as it can get. And I like cheeseburgers from time to time. Well, so do I. I probably like them more time to time than you.
Right.
And that is none of your damn business.
Well, the astonishing thing about the rest of that clip to me is that, who was asking the questions, do you know?
That was Aaron Burnett.
Aaron Burnett, which I think, I don't know. I have a theory on her. Maybe I'll get to it towards the end of this. But when she asked about like changing the guidelines and all of that stuff, and Kamala Harris says absolutely or whatever, I thought those guidelines were based in science or something. I didn't know that this was just at the political whim or agenda of whoever is in government at the time.
This is like the GDP thing.
Yeah, exactly.
It doesn't matter anymore. We're just going to start throwing things in there that have nothing to do with any of it. I mean, you're right. I guess nutritionists have had it wrong. I mean, really, that's what they're saying. Nutritionists have had it wrong for all of human civilization. Not just nutritionists, but just people. Like every human being who has ever lived that's eaten meat throughout the history of human civilization, they've gotten it wrong because they've been contributing to a climate crisis this whole time that they had no idea. Now we're so smart and so educated. We know that that's happening. And so the only way to stop it is to change the food pyramid, because, every time I go to McDonald's or whatever, I first look at the food pyramid to see what I should be eating. And then, we gotta create incentives, which should be the most horrifying word in that entire clip there, because what does that mean? Create incentives for behavior.
What do you
She doesn't
think?
want to stop you, Jim, from eating a cheeseburger. She just wants to disincentivize you from eating
Well,
a cheeseburger.
okay, so that is actually something I wanted to bring up, and thank you for reminding me. But she interchanges the idea of incentives and bans as if they are synonymous.
Right.
So what is the incentive for that you could create on something that you're banning? I think it's not going to jail. Like what is she talking about?
Well, that's basically what's going to keep a cheeseburger from Five Guys out of my hands is the concept of jail.
Yeah, you're incentivized by
But
see, I think what she's trying to say, and she just totally butchers it because she probably didn't have that question asked to her in her debate prep team, but she probably what she's trying to say is, I don't want to ban cheeseburgers. I like eating cheeseburgers too from time to time. But we need to have a conversation about incentivizing people not to eat cheeseburgers.
I guess I should have clarified. She talks about incentivizing and banning, like they're interchangeable when she was talking about getting rid of fossil fuel on federal lands and banning fracking and banning offshore drilling. She would say that she's for banning it, and we got to create the incentives to whatever. Those things are totally different. Incentivizing companies to not drill offshore and banning it are two different things.
there are certain aspects of public life or life in which the government has the ability to set policy. Arguably, drilling offshore or in the Arctic or in the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge up in Alaska, these things are voted on or they are regulated by agencies that are given the power to do so. Maybe they shouldn't have that power, but they do. Drilling offshore, you can make the argument, government has a say in that. Government does not have a say in how many cheeseburgers you can have, how much meat is produced in the United States. Everything about what happened in this telethon of climate nuttery is that everything is going to be centrally planned. There's a plan for everything. Yeah. Everything is going to be determined by government bureaucrats. How much food do we grow? What kind of cars do we drive? What kind of straws do we use? How many cheeseburgers Kamala Harris is allowed to have every month? This will all be determined by government bureaucrats who will be dictating this to the country.
Well,
that is what's behind all of this. It's insane.
Well, I will get to the spectrum of coercion, which we've talked about in the past in past episodes, but I will bring that up. But you're right. I mean, you start off with encouraging people, then incentivizing, then banning.
Yeah, because the people in the audience actually said, "What are you going to do to enforce this?" I mean, it's not enough just to suggest it. Like, what plan do you have to make sure it happens? To make us do what they want.
Well, okay, but sticking with the food stuff. So you've had other people kind of talk about this. Other candidates were talking about this. Somebody, let's see, Yang encouraged farm-to-table system to get rid of factory farming. I think another candidate or two talked about the idea of factory farming. But you can find studies that show that factory farming, as terrible as it sounds and all of that stuff, it's actually has less emissions because it's more condensed into the certain area or whatever. It's actually less emissions. So if you wanted to get rid of factory farming, you are increasing emissions. The other thing is, I think, again, Yang brought up the idea of people becoming vegetarian. Studies show that only reduces your CO2 footprint by 2 to 4%. Also, you have to consider the fact that 80% of people that become vegetarian stop after like 6 weeks. So
not if they're going to be thrown a gulag, Donnie.
Not if they're going to be thrown in a gulag.
Not if they're going to be in prison. Then they might stick it out for a little bit longer at least.
Yeah.
Can you imagine? Can you imagine the food in federal prisons under these regimes? Oh my God, that's enough incentive not to commit crime.
Another thing that
I can't imagine. It's the same it's the same food that we feed the kids in school, basically.
Another thing that Kamala Harris says in that same clip, if it were to continue to go on further, she talks about having. She's endorsing a mandate that products on the back of their labels will be extended to include what the impact on the environment would be. What is that? Give me an example of what that actually means.
What
if
it
you
means,
eat this
Donald,
can of
is
beans,
this. It's very clear what it means.
All right, you explain it to
You're
me.
gonna buy a gallon of milk,
Uh-huh.
and on the gallon, if they even let you do that, and then you're gonna buy the gallon of milk, and on it is gonna be a big warning label that says the milk from this cow. Okay, milk came from a cow, and that cow contributed to global warming by X%.
Right,
and by drinking this, you are contributing, adding to your carbon footprint by X%.
Yeah, okay,
and you
all right.
deserve to go to jail. The label's going to say all of that.
But like,
right on it.
we talk about how, like states, Idaho, we were doing a policy paper on Idaho, and it's like, even if they were to reduce their emissions to completely zero, that's going to have a 0.00012 impact on global temperatures or something like that, right? So is like that milk jug going to have, like, if you drink this milk jug, you are contributing 0.00000 to the 12th factor 0.1. Like, what is it actually going to say?
You know what I want to know is how many factory farmed apples do I have to avoid eating in my life to make up for 10 minutes of Leonardo DiCaprio on a private plane?
Yeah, right.
That's what I want to know. How many apples and cheeseburgers do I have to give up in order to offset Leo DiCaprio's, jets and his yachts and his gigantic mansion? I live in a studio apartment, man. So, I mean, this guy's carbon footprint is like my carbon footprint probably for 20 years.
Right.
And so I want to know how much is this actually going to impact. It's just so incredibly it's a stat. And the funny thing about it, too, is just politically, it's amazing that they would go this route. Right. Mm-hmm. Because this seems like the thing that you would obviously want to avoid if you were them. And yet they have no problem talking about this. Yeah, let me tell you how I'm going to, try to coerce you into not eating so much red meat.
Right.
Let me tell you how I'm going to do that. Why? Also that they can win this tiny little public policy battle? No, I think what this shows more than anything else, it's not just that they are authoritarian because they're a politician, so they'll basically say anything to get elected, right? Uh-huh. It's a reflection of what they think their Democratic Party primary voters want. Right?
Yeah.
So this is what they want in that party. At least that's what they think they want.
Yeah.
They think that their base wants control over every aspect of people's lives. That's what they think that they want. So that in and of itself is terrifying. Forget about Kamala Harris. This is what Kamala Harris thinks most millions of people in her party want this. And she's just trying to give them what they want. They want red meat banned, or they want red meat, disincentivized or whatever. I think that's pretty scary in and of itself.
Well, and here's the scarier part, okay? This is the Bernie Sanders clip that has been getting a lot of attention. So I'm going to play it in its entirety here. But yeah, this is something that gets me heated, man. So let me just play this and then we could respond. Bernie Sanders on population control.
Human population growth has more than doubled in the past 50 years. The planet cannot sustain this growth. I realize this is a poisonous topic for politicians, but it's crucial to face. Empowering women and educating everyone on the need to curb population growth seems a reasonable campaign to enact. Would you be courageous enough to discuss this issue and make it a key feature of a plan to address climate catastrophe?
Well, Martha, the answer is yes. And the answer has everything to do with the fact that women in the United States of America, by the way, have a right to control their own bodies and make reproductive decisions. And the Mexico City Agreement, which denies American aid to those organizations around the world that allow women to have abortions or even get involved in birth control, to me is totally absurd. So I think, especially in poor countries around the world, where women do not necessarily want to have large numbers of babies, and where they can have the opportunity through birth control to control the number of kids they have, something I very, very strongly support.
That's right. Bernie Sanders talking about encouraging other countries. He specifically points out third world countries because there are people that are having too many babies. And then he wants to encourage that. What's crazy to me is that the questioner was basically saying, would you encourage people to not have kids? Would you embark on a campaign to educate people about basically not having kids to protect the climate? And without thinking, Bernie Sanders says absolutely.
This, like I said, there wasn't an idea that was too nutty for these people to immediately say yes to.
Right.
And by the way, this questioner was a teacher, a public school teacher. That's scary enough. Yeah. and also, she wasn't asking, would you encourage or would you suggest? She was asking for specific federal policy to discourage birth.
Right.
To reduce population. That's what China does. Maybe Bernie is for the China's one-child policy. Apparently so.
I mean, that's the extreme. So, Justin, feel free to chime in. But
yeah. So I think that I think the question was clearly it's a really interesting question, right? Because she's asking, would you encourage women to do this? Would you encourage women to do this? And to Jim's point, the interesting thing about that is he can encourage women to do this now. So what does she mean by would you, if you were president, encourage to do that? That seems to suggest something more than just saying, hey, women, you should stop having so many kids.
Right.
It seems to be more than that. It seems there has to be some sort of policy element to it. Otherwise, why would you ask him in that way? Like, why would you say, if you were president, would you do things that would try to encourage people to not have children when he can do that right now? The only reason you would do that is if you're suggesting that there's some sort of policy element to that. So at the very least, you would think what she's saying is, would you have some sort of public campaign encouraging women not to have kids?
Well,
would you have a federal agency or something like the Department of Health and Human Services issuing some kind of Orwellian sort of poster or something that says, hey, don't have kids if you want to save the planet? I mean, is that what she's suggesting? That's what it seems like. And he, without missing a beat, says, yep. Absolutely.
Yeah, we covered, this is episode 115, so I had to really search back through the channels of our show here, but I found it. Episode 115, we talked in length about a study titled Population Engineering and the Fight Against Climate Change. So this was published by several academics that were kind of big in the realm of population control. And they basically laid out policies prescriptions as they fall on a spectrum of coercion. This is the thing that I kind of mentioned earlier in the discussion about food, I think. And they outlined these 4 different ways that we can approach this, and they endorsed 3 of them. They didn't endorse the far extreme one, which I think would be the single-child policy out of China and stuff like that. But it starts off with choice enhancement, right? So this is the access and knowledge about abortion and birth control and healthcare, et cetera. So I think that's kind of what Bernie Sanders was talking about there. The second level is preference adjustment, which is changing the cultural norms, influencing beliefs and desires done through the media and education. So that is propaganda, right? That's what her question was about. She was asking about that, about the campaign to encourage women to not do this to fight climate change. She was asking about that. Bernie answered it saying yes, but then talking about stuff that falls in that first realm. The third one is incentivization. So this is tax breaks for having no children, which is just a semantics way of saying that they're going to tax you for having kids. And then the fourth one is coercion, right? So the fact that we are talking about this on a Democratic presidential stage at a national level is terrifying to me.
He was asked straight up, is global population control part of your climate plan? And he said yes.
Right.
I mean, that's the bottom line. He think and what's actually kind of interesting, especially for somebody woke like Bernie Sanders, is that his opinion is that people in Africa and Asia, subcontinental Asia, are having too many kids.
Right.
Oh,
Yeah,
that's interesting.
Can you imagine somebody on our side saying something like that? I mean, my God. I mean, we would just be crucified if we said something like that.
Right.
I mean, you're talking about a continent full of people who aren't white. I don't know if Bernie Sanders knows that, but they're not white in Africa, and they're not Caucasian in China and in places like that. So when he suggests that we should go to these countries and pay money, taxpayer money, to organizations so that they'll provide abortions and give people condoms and birth control pills and stuff so they won't have so many dang kids because that would destroy the planet. He's basically suggesting eugenics, like a climate change eugenics.
Right.
It is amazing.
Yeah, and I forgot to kind of mention some of these up front, but some of this information and kind of what to look for has been supplied to me from certain organizations like the Foundation for Economic Education. They had a pretty good, it was like the top 4 questions that you probably won't hear at the CNN's Climate Crisis Town Hall. So they've got some good information in there about like nuclear energy and that type of stuff. The other one that I've got here is 4 memorable moments from CNN's Climate Town Hall, which was done by Nick Gillespie at Reason. So all of these things will be linked in the show notes, and I've got a couple of other things that kind of support some of the other stuff that we've talked about, that if you're interested for the research, you can look in there. But I bring this up because one of the 4 memorable moments from CNN's Climate Town Hall from the Reason article talks about this very thing, about the aggressively fighting the phantom menace of global overpopulation. And it goes through and basically shows that this is not the case. We are not running out of room on the planet. We're not going to suffer some Paul Ehrlich style running out of food apocalypse in the future. And the fact is that the population growth is actually slowing down and could potentially plateau within the next 50 to 100 years. So this idea that we're running out of the planet and that the planet can't sustain such a population, that the context of that lady's question is just like a falsity.
We've brought up the name Paul Ehrlich a lot, in the past. Author of The Population Bomb, which was from 1968. He was a professor at Stanford University, elite school, elite professor, best-selling book, The Population Bomb. And he said by the year 2000, we'd basically be living in Mad Max, right? And that hasn't come to pass. And these are the same kind of experts that are telling us that we have to completely reform our entire societies in exactly the way they say, or we're all going to die. And you should believe it as much now as it was proven right back in 1968.
So the last kind of main topic that I want to get to here is just more banning stuff. That's kind of the theme of this. And so they went through the whole litany of things that they would ban, including straws, right? Because, of course, we have that image of the turtle with the straw in its nose. And we've talked about it for numerous times about how 95% of the plastic pollution in the oceans actually comes from developing countries that have terrible waste management systems. And I think 2% comes from the United States. 2%. Also, banning plastic bags. Several of the candidates talked about banning plastic bags. And we've talked about on the podcast, again, numerous times about the actual impact that this would have would be negative if you're looking at it under the scope of carbon dioxide emissions. I think that the one thing, the numbers are going to be terrible, but whatever. It was like a cloth bag. You'd have to use it 10,000 times for it to actually pay for itself in terms of carbon dioxide emissions. And like health becomes a problem with those bags after you use it like 5 times. So do the math on that one. And then there was also a study that earlier this year that was in the Journal of Environmental Economics and Management that shows that California's plastic bag ban increased CO2 emissions by 59 million pounds annually. So it's just virtue signaling. I mean, we could chalk up most of this to virtue signaling, but I think like this in terms of the plastic bags and the straw bans, I think this is like the highest degree of virtue signaling.
Yeah, for sure. It absolutely does nothing. If anything, it has a negative impact. I'm currently living in Boston, where they have not a plastic bag ban, but they have a bag tax that they apply.
Okay.
And it's 5 cents. And I don't think I have literally ever turn down a bag because I have to pay an extra 5 cents. They could start charging me an extra 5 cents more on all these transactions. I probably would have no idea that it's going on. It has made no impact on my bag usage at all. And interestingly, they charge it regardless of whether it's plastic. So if it's a paper bag, they also charge you for an extra 5 cents. So I don't even really understand what they're going for in all of this.
Well,
but
it's just
the idea that charging people 5 cents is going to change their behavior is just totally insane anyway, just on its face.
Well, see, that's the point, Justin. Charging you 5 cents obviously didn't change your behavior. Probably doesn't change a lot of people's behavior, if they even notice. But, they want to ban all the things.
That's just a tax revenue generator.
Oh,
That's
sure.
all that is.
They want to ban plastic. You don't have the clip up, I don't think. But, Kamala Harris even said, when you get a drink with one of those paper straws, you got to drink it really fast. You have to gulp it down because the straw ends up being useless in no time. I actually don't think that's true. I've had a few paper straws in my time, and it's fine. But they don't last past 2 drinks. I'll tell you that. But it's about control. We don't need to ban plastic straws in the United States because the amount of plastic waste in the oceans that comes from the United States is very small, especially compared to our GDP. It's almost nothing compared to our GDP. But see, they don't care. It's not about incentivizing. They're going to make it happen. So even though Kamala Harris admits that paper straws suck, well, actually, they don't suck. That's the problem. But they are terrible. Yeah, that's right. But they are terrible. And she doesn't care. She even admits, it's terrible. But we should ban plastic straws. I think we should. Yeah, cheeseburgers. I love them. But we should ban that too. They don't care about your freedom. That's always the problem with the left. And with all of these Democratic candidates right now, they're all coming out on the premise of the idea that you have too much freedom, that businesses have too much freedom, that in fact our country, the way we're set up, allows too much freedom. Yeah. That is what they're running on. Right. And that's what people should remember. These things may seem small. And Justin, you said this before, slippery slope arguments. That's why we make them. It's because they're never satisfied. Mm-hmm. And it's because they think you have too much freedom and they have to take it away for your own good. Hell with that.
So and by the way, we're just adding on to that real quickly. If anybody thinks after listening to this, that when we have this single payer healthcare paradise, they're not going to try to have all kinds of different mandates and controls and things that they're going to want to alter our behavior. After watching this, are you kidding me? They want to alter our red meat consumption because they're worried that it might cause climate change 80 years into the future. Yeah. Do you think that they're going to think twice about it if they think that you eating red meat is going to cost them an extra, however many dollars at the end of your life when they have to do, a certain number of extra heart procedures or something like that? Right. I mean, they're going to have all sorts of calculations under a single payer healthcare plan.
It turns out, Mr. Haskins, that your hamburger consumption is 2 times the Kamala Harris level, and so you're going to have to pay twice as much. This is your social credit score referring to this. So it turns out that an hour was not enough to respond to all of this stuff because I still have several things, so I'll just rapid fire some of these. I did have a clip, but I won't play it, of basically Yang talking about how he is for the Green New Deal, with the exception of the timeline thing. He even brings up the fact that it wants to phase out all air travel. And he says that if we had more time, then we could get there. So he's for the most extreme parts of the Green New Deal, even the air travel stuff. He just thinks that we need a little bit more time to do it.
Well, yeah, let's talk about Yang, because he also said that he wants to make sure everybody gets into electric cars.
Yeah.
And he was asked straight out, and I'll give CNN credit for this. It's like, oh, so you're saying that you would ban gasoline-powered cars? Oh, yeah, those clunkers. We'll get those clunkers off the road. We'll have buybacks, but everybody's going to love being in their new electric vehicles.
Yeah, well,
he was pressed again. So you're really saying that you're going to make people drive electric cars? Look, electric cars are great. People are going to love their new electric cars. And then we're going to get those clunkers off the road. Clunkers, like a souped up 1968 classic Mustang.
Sure.
You're gonna make
it's
someone
a gas guzzler.
the gas guzzler. What are you going to compensate somebody for giving that up?
Yeah,
it's probably going to cost you about $7 million per, because people are not going to want to give that up.
Well, it seemed like he stopped short of banning it. He was the whole creating incentive stuff, but he did mention the idea of a car buyback program, that the government would buy your cars off of you.
Yeah,
so
cash for clunkers.
Whether or not that's mandatory, I'll leave that up to your judgment, listener. But the other thing that was brought up a few times was the idea of the government getting to dictate what light bulbs you use. I think Bernie Sanders said that these light bulbs are built to go out so that they could still have more light bulbs to sell to you or something like that, which I think is a ridiculous anti-capitalism propaganda thing. But I mean, then we've talked about light bulbs a million times on this. Car buyback program, Green New Deal, airplanes. Is there anything else that I'm missing here?
There's one thing I want Justin to jump in here too. I'm sorry to dominate on this issue, but it really, every time they kept saying we're going to go all electric and we're going to get all these gas guzzlers off the road, and you're going to love your new electric vehicles. Like, how are we going to do all this farming? How many tractors? An electric tractor? Yeah. How are we going to build these cities of the future with solar powered cranes?
Well, you charge them up using diesel generators.
Oh, sure, okay, that'll work. and then you see the devastation, the horrible, tragic, unbelievable devastation in the Bahamas. How is that all going to get cleaned up? How is it being cleaned up now? How are people actually being kept alive right now in the Bahamas?
Yeah.
Through fossil fuels,
right.
through gas. There's somebody, I saw a tweet, there's a picture. Somebody had donated 500 generators to send to, just out of his own pocket, 50 grand. Here you go. Send 500 gas-powered generators to the Bahamas to help keep people alive. Send them to the hospitals first to make sure those people are alive. If we were actually at that zero carbon as fast as possible, do you know how many people would die? Not just ordinarily, but during a disaster? You would never be able to help these people because we couldn't, because the left has outlawed all the things that would actually keep people alive.
So I just want to also kind of bring up again the concept that all of these crazy ideas are being presented on, it was a primetime CNN, which is kind of a joke, but whatever.
It was, because for 7 hours, it went into the primetime area. You're right.
All of these ideas, national level, running for national level of government here, president, on the one of the bigger networks, CNN. I kind of have to put that in quotes. But so it just kind of like goes to show where like the Overton window is shifting on some of this stuff, right? The Green New Deal, that we like didn't even want to talk about it at first because it was just so ridiculous that we thought it wasn't even worth wasting our breath on, right? Between that being talked about by all of the candidates, population control, which was just some nut jobs like report that we commented on, being talked about by Bernie Sanders. Meat consumption, changing that, restricting it all. So it's just kind of like, what's next, right? So Justin sent me this article that if we are continuing on this trend, expect to see a candidate talking about this on CNN in 8 to 10 years here. Says at a summit for food of the future called Gastro Summit in Stockholm in September 4th, 3rd through the 4th, a professor held a PowerPoint presentation asserting that we must awaken the idea of eating human flesh in the future as a way of combating the effects of climate change. In a talk titled, "Can You Imagine Eating Human Flesh?" behavioral scientist and marketing strategist Magnus Soderlund from the College of Commerce argues for the breaking down of the ancient taboos against desecrating the human corpse and eating human flesh. He refers to the taboos against it as conservative and discusses people's resistance to it as a problem that could be overcome little by little, beginning with persuading people to just taste it. So this guy has skipped over the idea of eating other animals or lab-grown meat or insects and went straight to humans, man. This is insane. This is absolutely
totally
insane. And I will never look at the Swedish meatball the same again.
Yeah, no, there's no question about it. They are totally off their rockers. But I guess logically, right? If you're them and you're thinking to yourself, well, unless we all just commit suicide and kill ourselves, mass suicide to kill all of humanity, we can't have animals provide us with food, because if we have too many animals, then that creates too much carbon dioxide emissions, and that destroys the planet with global warming. So the only other way to get meat is to eat dead humans. That's it. They've run out of options. It's the most logically consistent way of looking at the issue, I guess.
But I think this, okay, so even if you kind of dismiss the idea of the Overton window and that the fringe ideas of today are the mainstream ideas of tomorrow type of thing, doesn't this just kind of show you like the insanity that like this alarmism is driving people to? Like the fact that this guy is going to come to a conference, a professor at a college is going to come to this conference and advocate eating meat as a solution, or eating human meat as a solution to climate change, is just showing that this is driving people insane. It's kind of scary.
The people on the extremes of climate alarmism have always been this way. But where the Overton window has moved, as you mentioned, is that this is becoming mainstream. You can actually go to a conference to talk about that now. Mm-hmm. I mean, but I'm sure he's believed that for a very long time.
Probably. And
it's because the radical environmentalist left believes that humanity, gosh, it's like the Matrix. It's like Agent Smith on the Matrix. Humans are a virus.
Yeah.
We are destroying, literally, that speech that Agent Smith gives to Morpheus.
Yeah, you're right.
It is actually what the environmental left believes.
That's Bernie Sanders' campaign speech next week.
That is. Oh my God.
You stinking humans, I could taste you when you walk in the room.
Somebody needs to do a deep fake with his face on Agent Smith and put it on YouTube. It'll be awesome.
Oh, God. All right.
Yeah,
we are out of
so
time.
true.
We are out of time, folks.
Hold on. I have one more thing.
All right, this is your final word. This is your final word.
This is my final word. So one of the things we did not talk about in all of this somehow is the cost of many of these plans.
Oh, sure.
And I do want to mention that the most expensive plan, because there were many different plans, the most expensive plan offered was Bernie Sanders. His plan would cost $16 trillion over the first 10 years in order to replace all of our energy with wind and solar and provide people who have been displaced as a result of this, destroying all these millions of jobs in the fossil fuel industry. He wants to pay their salaries for years and years and years while they look for new jobs. It would cost $16 trillion. So if you actually take the $16 trillion, just to put this into context, and you divide it among the 83 million families the U.S. Census Bureau says exist in the United States today, that's $192,000 per family. So what would you rather have, America? Would you rather have wind and solar farms or $192,000? Because that's essentially what Bernie Sanders is suggesting here. Another thing, just to kind of put this into context, the entire cost of the war in Afghanistan, which the left has been telling us was a gigantic waste of money. We should never have done it. Although we've heard this, Bernie Sanders voted against many of these things. I don't know if he voted against the war in Afghanistan, but he definitely voted against Iraq. The entire cost of the war in Afghanistan over the last 2 decades combined is $1 trillion.
Wow. Okay.
So this is $16 trillion, $15 trillion more, 16 times the cost of the entire 2 decades long war in Afghanistan. Wow. It's incredible.
Yeah, I mean, numbers that high are just so abstract to the average person, including me, obviously. So I think that's why we kind of backloaded that. But it's definitely something to consider there. But folks, this stuff is crazy. I think that this was an absolute PR nightmare for the Democratic Party. I think that as you go, you're not going to see a lot of highlight reels from the left, as Jim was talking about. You're going to see a lot of advertisements from the right using footage from this, which is just proof of how much of a disaster this was for them, which is hilarious to me and makes good podcasts. So, folks, thank you for joining us. Tune in every Friday for a new episode of the In the Tank podcast. If you like our show, please subscribe or review for us on iTunes. We'd greatly appreciate it. If you would like, you can follow us on Twitter at In the Tank Pod. If you'd like to send us comments, suggestions, questions, anecdotes, jokes, whatever you'd like, feel free to email us at inthethankpodcast@gmail.com. gmail.com. Jim, where can the fine people find you?
At Jay Lakely on Twitter, and you can find Heartland at Heartland Inst.
And Justin, where can the fine people find you?
At Justin T. Haskins on Facebook and Twitter.
All right, well, so that will do it, but we will leave you with a nice supercut of all the things that these candidates plan on banning. Good night.
Would you support changing the dietary guidelines?
Yes.
The food pyramid, what people
Yes.
to reduce red meat specifically?
Yes, I would.
Do you ban plastic straws?
I think we should. Yes.
So would you ban offshore drilling?
Yes.
Just today, the Trump administration announced plans to overturn requirements on energy-saving light bulbs. Would you reinstate those requirements as president?
If you can get electricity from a light bulb that utilizes 1/10 of the power that an old incandescent light bulb used, of course you're going to do that.
We have to take combustion engine vehicles off the road as rapidly as we can.
Educating everyone on the need to curb population growth seems a reasonable campaign to enact. Would you be courageous enough to discuss this issue and make it a key feature of a plan to address climate catastrophe?
Well, Martha, the answer is yes. I think especially in poor countries around the world, where women do not necessarily want to have large numbers of babies, and where they can have the opportunity through birth control to control the number of kids they have, something I very, very strongly support.
Let's talk about offshore drilling for oil. Would you ban it?
Yes.
Would you ban offshore drilling? Absolutely yes. We will transition off of fossil fuels, natural gas, coal, oil. What about the export of fossil fuels from the United States? Would you ban that? Absolutely, we must get to that point.
There's no question I'm in favor of banning fracking.
I'm in favor of a carbon-free America.
In my administration, we're not going to build any new nuclear power plants.
We should set out the rules for what kind of plant, coal burning plants. No one's going to build another coal burning. We've got to shut the ones down we have.
We're going to end factory farming because that is a danger to the environment and to climate change. There will be a transition. There will be a transition and there will be some pain there.